Teodora Soto lived her life unnoticed, tucked into the corners of a bustling city that never cared to slow down. Every day, she did what she was supposed to: serve coffee, wipe down tables, and quietly watch the world pass by. In the back of her mind, she always imagined there had to be more. But even so, she was content with the simplicity. Or so she thought. That was until Marcus Stone, a frail, reclusive billionaire who had spent his entire life building a vast empire, started showing up at her cafe. Something about him felt different, like a storm hiding behind a smile. And one night, after everyone had gone, Marcus leaned across the counter and whispered, "I need you to find my daughter, Teodora. Before it's too late." His words burned through her. The calm she had known her whole life was gone, and the quiet world she lived in was no longer just hers. Now, everything she thought she understood, about family, trust, and even herself, was about to be shattered. Teodora spent her days serving endless plates of food to guests who never stopped to notice her, just another cog in the machine of a high-end restaurant. But there was something different about Marcus Stone. Every time he walked in, he was followed by an eerie silence. His eyes seemed to pierce through everything, as though he was carrying a weight too heavy for anyone else to understand. One rainy night, Marcus asked Teodora to stay after her shift. The storm outside raged harder now, its thunder booming in the distance, as the wind howled against the windows. She didn't know why she stayed. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, or the way the atmosphere around him seemed to change when he was near. He wasn't like the other rich men she served. He was different. And then, in a moment that chilled her to the core, Marcus whispered, "I need you to find my daughter, Teodora. Before it's too late." Teodora's heart skipped a beat. Who was this man, really? What was he hiding? And what would she discover if she followed his strange request? Teodora's life is about to change, and the truth is just beginning to unfold. Hit like, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts. What's Marcus hiding? Don't miss the next chapter as the mystery deepens. Teodora's world began to unravel with Marcus's words still ringing in her mind. The simple life she'd built in her quiet cafe now felt insignificant, overshadowed by the mystery he had awakened. Curiosity pulled her forward, urging her to step beyond the mundane and uncover something much bigger, something that could change everything. The cafe was quiet, too quiet. The storm outside had muted the usual hustle of the city. Rain pelted the windows like 1,000 tiny fists, and wind howled through the cracks in the old brick walls. The low hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that broke the silence as Teodora Soto wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time. She glanced at the clock. 11:42 p.m. Another 18 minutes before her shift ended. Just 18 minutes, and then she could leave, head home to her small, cluttered apartment and sink into the comfort of her routine. It had been a slow night, but it was the same every week. The regulars came and went, barely noticing her presence as she moved around the room, an invisible fixture in the background of their lives. She had long since learned to accept it. Her life was small, tucked in the shadows of the city's towering ambitions, and she was content with it. At least she had a job. At least she was safe. She flicked a damp cloth over the counter, checking the time again. The seconds crawled by. It was getting late, and the last customers had long since gone. Just as she prepared to slip behind the counter and pull on her coat, the door's bell chimed. Teodora paused, the sudden sound like a jolt of static to her nerves. A man walked in, his silhouette barely visible through the rain-smeared glass. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and in that moment, everything in the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Marcus Stone. He moved slowly, methodically, like someone who carried the weight of his years with pride, but also with something else, a burden, a darkness that seemed to cling to him, even in the warm, dimly lit cafe. His clothes were expensive but understated, a dark wool coat hanging loosely from his narrow shoulders. His face was sharp, lined with age, but his eyes, they were what Teodora noticed most. They were sharp too, cold, distant, as though he was watching the world through a thick fog. There was a quiet power about him, an unnerving stillness that made the air thick and heavy. Teodora's heart skipped. She hadn't seen him here before, and yet, something about him felt hauntingly familiar, like the kind of man who never truly let anyone in. Her calm demeanor, the practiced professionalism that had kept her shielded for so long, faltered for just a second. She tried to shake it off, wiping the counter a little harder than necessary, focusing on the rhythm of her movements, the steady motions that kept her grounded. Just another rich man, looking for a quiet corner to hide away from his world. But something told her this would not be like the others. Marcus Stone took a seat at the corner booth, eyes never leaving her. His gaze was unnerving, like he was seeing straight through her, straight into the parts of herself that she usually kept hidden. He hadn't spoken yet, but his presence was louder than any words. Theodora swallowed and moved towards him. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. He didn't immediately respond, studying her for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate. "Coffee." "Black," he said, his words clipped but not unkind. She nodded, feeling the weight of his gaze follow her every movement as she made the coffee. His presence in the cafe, in her world, felt almost invasive. She set the cup before him, her hand brushing against his for just a split second. The touch sent a shiver through her, and she quickly stepped back, her heart pounding harder than before. His eyes flickered up to hers, and for the first time since he entered, there was a flicker of something, an emotion maybe or a memory, deep in his gaze. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying an odd weight. Theodora wasn't sure what to say. There was something about him, something about the way he moved, the way he sat so still, so perfectly in place, that made her feel out of her depth. She'd served men like him before, wealthy, powerful, but Marcus Stone wasn't like the others. There was a depth to him, something unreadable, as though he existed in a world of his own making. For a moment, she stood there, caught in his gaze, unsure of what to do. Then he spoke again, his voice low, drawing her attention. "I need you to stay after your shift," he said, his words simple but heavy. "I have something to ask of you." Theodora blinked. Her chest tightened. "I'm just about to close," she said, trying to maintain her professional tone, but there was an edge to her voice she couldn't hide. He glanced at her then, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "It won't take long. I'll make it worth your time." A chill ran down her spine. There was something too compelling in his words, something that made it impossible to refuse. For a second, she considered saying no. She'd never stayed late for anyone before. But then again, she'd never met anyone like him. What could it hurt? Theodora nodded. "I'll stay." He didn't smile, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes. Something like approval, or perhaps just understanding. "Good," he said softly. "I need you to find my daughter, Theodora." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she staggered slightly, as if he'd knocked the breath right out of her. "Your daughter?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "She doesn't know I'm dying. I want her to know the truth before it's too late." Theodora's heart began to race, her thoughts swirling. What truth? Why me? She had no idea why Marcus Stone, a man she didn't know, would ask such a personal favor of her. He had money, power. Why wasn't he using those resources to find her? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "I've made mistakes, Theodora. Things I can't undo. But this is the one thing I can fix before it's too late." His words were heavy with guilt, with something unspoken that made her feel like she was stepping into a world much darker than she could imagine. What could he be hiding? Theodora's chest tightened. This wasn't just a simple request. This wasn't just about a lost daughter. This was about something far more complex, something deeper. She didn't know why, but a part of her knew she couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Her mind raced as her heart pounded in her chest. What did he want with her? What was he hiding? As the rain hammered against the windows, and the clock ticked toward the end of her shift, Theodora realized her quiet, simple life was no longer hers. She had been pulled into Marcus Stone's web, and there was no turning back. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered if she was ready for whatever truth awaited her. Theodora's world is on the edge of unraveling. Marcus Stone's chilling request has just shattered her quiet life. What truth is he hiding, and why is he asking her to find his daughter? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The story is just starting. Theodora sat alone in her small apartment, the flickering streetlights outside casting shadows on the walls. The rain still pounded relentlessly against the windows, mirroring the turmoil inside her. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the letter Marcus had given her, though it was folded neatly and untouched. Her mind raced. What was Marcus thinking? She could still hear his words echoing in her mind, the weight of them pressing on her chest. "I need you to find my daughter, Theodora." Before it's too late. The request had come out of nowhere, completely outside the scope of her predictable world. She had spent her entire life serving others, men like Marcus Stone, who floated in and out of her cafe without a second thought, never lingering longer than necessary. But Marcus, he wasn't like the others. There was a vulnerability about him, hidden beneath the layers of wealth and power. A storm of doubt churned inside her. Was this just another rich man's whim? She had seen them all before, the entitled, the demanding, the ones who thought money could buy anything, even loyalty. But there was something different about Marcus. His frailty, his quiet desperation, it spoke to something deeper, something more urgent. She glanced at the clock. It was nearing midnight, and she should have been asleep, but sleep wouldn't come. The request was too heavy, too strange. Why her? Why would Marcus, a man who had everything, turn to her, a simple waitress, to fulfill such an intimate and personal mission? Theodora's thoughts drifted back to her life, small, predictable, safe. She had found comfort in the monotony of her days. She'd been content with the rhythm of her work, with the knowledge that her life wasn't complicated. But now, with Marcus's cryptic words hanging in the air, she wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe there was more to her life than serving coffee and cleaning tables. Maybe it was time to step out of the shadows. But even as she entertained the possibility, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. What if this was a mistake? What if she was walking into something she couldn't understand, something too dangerous? The doorbell of her apartment rang, breaking the silence. Theodora's heart skipped a beat as she stood up, startled. Who could it be at this hour? She hadn't been expecting anyone. She opened the door cautiously, her hand instinctively reaching for the lock. When she saw the familiar figure standing outside, a rush of mixed emotions flooded her. It was Marcus. His coat was damp from the rain, and he looked even frilier than before, as if the weight of his years had suddenly increased in just the short span of a few days. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced behind him, as though checking to make sure no one was watching, before stepping inside. The moment the door closed behind him, he looked at her with a deep sadness in his eyes, a sadness that made Theodora's heart ache for him, even though she barely knew him. "I had to see you," he said, his voice hoarse. He sank into the nearest chair, his frame bent and worn. "I never should have asked you for this. I never should have involved you in this mess." Theodora stared at him, trying to process what was happening. "What mess?" "Marcus," she began, her voice steady, "I don't understand. Why me? Why would you ask me, a waitress, to find your daughter? And why now? You've built an empire, a life full of power, wealth. You could have anyone do this for you. What's the truth, Marcus? What's really going on?" His eyes shifted to the floor, and he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. The vulnerability in his expression was unmistakable, raw. "It's not that simple," he murmured. "I've lived my whole life avoiding this. Hiding from it. But now, with time running out, I can't hide anymore. I have to fix this. I have to make amends before it's too late." Theodora took a step closer, her heart pounding. There was something in his words, an urgency, a sincerity, that made her believe he wasn't lying. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "You don't have much time, do you?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching his. "No," he said softly. "And that's why I need you to help me. I never had a chance to apologize to my daughter, to make things right. I failed her, Theodora. I failed her and I failed myself. Now, I have to find her. I have to tell her the truth." She watched him, waiting for him to continue. His eyes glistened, and for the first time, she saw the weight of regret in them. "Please," he whispered, almost pleading, "find her. Bring her to me." Theodora opened her mouth to speak, but before she could form a response, Marcus reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a letter. The edges were worn, the paper slightly yellowed. He handed it to her with shaking hands. "This is all the information you need," he said, his voice breaking. "Everything you need to find her is in there. Her name is Aisha Stone." He hesitated, as though debating whether to say more. "That's all I can tell you. The rest, you'll have to uncover on your own." Theodora took the letter from him, her fingers brushing against his cold skin. She didn't know what she expected, but the letter felt heavy in her hand. As she unfolded the paper, she saw a name written in neat handwriting, Aisha Stone. The letter, though, was unfinished. There was no explanation, no further information. The silence in the room was deafening. Theodora stared at the letter, her mind racing. Why would he leave something so incomplete? Her pulse quickened. What was he hiding? Why had he given her so little to go on? Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of Marcus's request settled over her. Was she really prepared for what lay ahead? What had she just agreed to? Why is it unfinished? She asked, her voice shaking slightly as she looked up at Marcus, the letter still in her hands. What aren't you telling me? Marcus's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He turned his head slightly, avoiding her gaze. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with regret. That's all I can give you. Please, Theodora, I need you to do this for me. Please, before it's too late. Theodora stood there, the weight of the letter heavy in her hands. She had no answers. She only had questions, and an overwhelming sense that her life was about to take a turn she wasn't prepared for. And somewhere deep inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Theodora's life is hanging in the balance, and the truth is just out of reach. What is Marcus hiding, and why is the letter unfinished? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned as things are just about to get even darker. The clock on the wall seemed to mock her, its ticking a constant reminder of time slipping away. Theodora sat at her small desk, surrounded by piles of paper, the dim light from her desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. She had spent hours combing through public records, scrolling through news articles, and flipping through dusty old files on her laptop. Every document, every scrap of information seemed like a piece of the puzzle she didn't understand yet. Her mind kept racing back to that night when Marcus had handed her the letter. The name written on it, Aisha Stone, echoed in her head, haunting her. Aisha Stone. The daughter Marcus had lost. The daughter he needed to find before his time ran out. Theodora felt an odd mix of urgency and exhaustion. She couldn't help but question why she was doing this. Was she really helping Marcus, or was this more about escaping her own mundane life? Every night, she returned to her apartment, sank into the worn armchair, and plunged into the search again. Each piece of information about Marcus's family only seemed to lead to more questions. And every time she unearthed a detail, the hole inside her grew bigger, more desperate to understand. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her tired eyes. The late-night searches had become her obsession. It wasn't just about finding Aisha anymore, it was about something else. Something deeper. Was she trying to fix Marcus's life or escape her own? Theodora had spent so long in the background, invisible in the eyes of the people around her. But now, with Marcus's request pulling her into a mystery far beyond anything she had ever imagined, she began to feel seen. She couldn't explain it, but there was a part of her that longed to be part of something more significant. To know that she mattered, that she could make a difference in someone else's life, in a way she never had before. The search consumed her. It became a part of her routine. Every evening after her shift, she would dive into the past of Marcus Stone and his estranged daughter. The more she learned, the more she realized how little she actually knew. She had uncovered a web of betrayal, lies, and wealth, a tangled mess that connected Marcus to a past full of regrets. There were mentions of a bitter family feud, a divorce, a long-standing separation between Marcus and his daughter. But the details were vague. They were always written between the lines, hidden beneath layers of legal jargon, behind closed doors that refused to open. Theodora couldn't help but feel like she was digging into something dangerous, something that had been buried for years. But she pressed on, not ready to back away now. She found an article that caught her attention. It was a brief mention in the society section of an old newspaper, a snippet about Marcus Stone and his wife Isabel, attending a gala. The picture in the article was faded, blurry, but there was a young girl standing beside them, probably Aisha, based on the time frame. Theodora zoomed in on the image, her breath catching. The girl's face was a mirror of the sadness she had seen in Marcus's eyes. The words below the photo read, "Marcus Stone's family. Is there hope for reconciliation?" The story was barely more than a few lines, but it told of an escalating feud that had torn Marcus and Isabel apart. The article implied that Aisha had been caught in the middle of it all, with her father and mother unable to find common ground. But that was where the trail ended. No more details. No answers. Theodora tossed the article aside and opened another tab on her laptop. She could feel the weight of her own doubts creeping in again. Was Marcus a man simply consumed by regret, or was there more to the story? The more she uncovered, the more she began to wonder, what kind of man was he really? She stared at the screen, then closed her laptop with a heavy sigh. It was almost 2 a.m., and she was no closer to finding Aisha than she had been hours ago. She needed a break. A moment to breathe. But just as she reached for her phone to check the time, a new message popped up on her screen. It was from a source she didn't recognize, someone named M. Jenkins. The message was brief. I know where Aisha Stone is. She's been living under a different name. If you want to find her, you need to go to a small town outside of town. Trust no one. It's all connected. Marcus has more to hide than you think. The message was signed, J. Theodora's heart skipped. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. How did this person know? And what did they mean by it's all connected? What was Marcus hiding? And why had he kept this truth from her? Her hands shook slightly as she typed a response. Who are you? Why are you telling me this? The reply came almost immediately. Because Marcus Stone isn't the only one with secrets. Go to the town of East Hollow. You'll find her there. But be careful. It's not what you think. Theodora swallowed hard. The message was cryptic, unsettling. The storm outside had grown fiercer, the wind howling like it was trying to tear down the world. Theodora stared at her phone screen for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was it. This was the moment where her life would change. She could feel it in her bones. She couldn't back down now. If she wanted answers, if she wanted to find Aisha and uncover the truth, she had to go. East Hollow. A town that sounded as mysterious as the message itself. The truth is just out of reach, and Theodora is on the edge of uncovering it. But what secrets does East Hollow hold? What will Theodora find in this strange town? Share your thoughts and stick around to find out. The next morning, after a restless night spent pacing in her apartment, Theodora packed a bag and left. She had no idea what she would find, but one thing was clear. The story she was about to uncover was much bigger than she had ever imagined. As she drove toward East Hollow, the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on her shoulders. The storm still raged in the distance, and the clouds above seemed to close in, as though the world was conspiring to hide the secrets that lay just beyond her reach. By the time she arrived in East Hollow, the sun was setting. The small town was quiet, eerie even, as if it had been forgotten by time itself. She could feel the weight of history hanging in the air, and she wasn't sure if it was the storm or the tension inside her that made everything feel so heavy. She parked her car near the local diner and stepped out, the sound of her boots hitting the pavement echoing in the empty streets. She had no idea where to start looking, but she was determined. This was it. She had to find Aisha. But when she finally found her, when she stood face to face with the woman she'd been searching for all this time, Theodora was not prepared for the response she would get. Aisha stared at her, her eyes cold, distant. I don't want anything from him, Aisha said, her voice flat, devoid of any warmth. Especially not his lies. Theodora's heart sank. The words hit her like a punch. She was standing in front of the woman who held the key to Marcus's past, the woman who had been lost to him for so many years, but all Theodora could see in Aisha's eyes was pain and bitterness. She had no idea what she was walking into. But one thing was certain, this was only the beginning. Theodora stood in the small, dimly lit room, her eyes fixed on Aisha. The woman before her seemed to be the physical embodiment of every scar, every wound that Marcus had caused. Aisha's coldness was palpable, an invisible wall that seemed to block out any attempt at connection. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze sharp and unyielding. Theodora took a step forward, her heart pounding. She had come this far, but Aisha's indifference made her question whether any of this was worth it. Aisha had every right to be angry, there was no denying that. But Theodora couldn't help but wonder if she was seeing the whole picture. Was Marcus truly the villain in this story? I don't understand, Theodora said, her voice soft but firm. Why do you hate him so much? What did he do to you? Aisha's expression flickered for a brief second, but she quickly masked it with a scowl. Hate? I don't hate him. I simply don't care anymore. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. He had his chance. He made his choices, and now he's paying for them. That's all that matters. Theodora could feel the weight of Aisha's words like an invisible force, pressing down on her chest. She wanted to push harder, to break through the cold exterior and understand the pain beneath it. But something told her that this wasn't going to be easy. Aisha had built walls so high that it seemed almost impossible to tear them down. "What happened between you two?" Theodora asked, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Why did he leave you? Why didn't he try to fix things?" Aisha's lips curled into a bitter smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You think you can fix him? You think you can change all the mistakes he made? Trust me, he doesn't want to be fixed. He's too proud for that. And I'm done waiting for him to make amends." Theodora felt the sting of Aisha's words, but she refused to back down. She needed answers. She needed to understand why Marcus was asking for this now. What had happened between them that had caused so much pain? "You're wrong about him," Theodora said softly. "I don't think he's proud. I think he's lost. And I think he regrets what he did. I think he wants to make things right. He's dying, Aisha. He has no time left. He's asking me to find you because he needs to fix things before it's too late." Aisha's face hardened, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that hinted at the pain she'd buried deep inside. For a moment, Theodora saw the cracks in her armor, the rawness that she had tried so hard to hide. But then it was gone, replaced by the coldness that had defined Aisha for so long. "I don't need him," Aisha said, her voice tight with restraint. "I don't need anything from him. What he did to my mother, what he did to both of us, it's unforgivable. He abandoned us when we needed him the most. And now, he wants to play the hero? It's too late for that." Theodora stood there in silence, her heart aching for Aisha. The woman before her was a daughter who had been abandoned by the one person she should have been able to trust. The anger, the bitterness, the walls, Theodora understood them now. It wasn't just about money, or pride, or even the family feud. It was about something deeper. Something far more painful. Theodora began to see beyond the surface, beyond the cold exterior that Aisha had so carefully built. The woman before her wasn't just angry, she was broken. She had spent years carrying the weight of her father's abandonment, and it had shattered her in ways Theodora couldn't even imagine. "You're not alone in this," Theodora said, her voice gentle. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you don't have to carry this by yourself. I'm here to help, Aisha. I want to understand. I want to help you both heal." Aisha's expression softened for a moment, but it quickly hardened again. "You think you can fix us? You think you can fix him?" she scoffed. "You don't understand. You don't know what it was like, growing up with him. The lies. The promises. The way he abandoned us, my mother and me, just when we needed him most." Theodora felt the weight of Aisha's words, but it wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something raw. And as Theodora listened, a piece of the puzzle began to fall into place. "Tell me what happened," Theodora said, her voice steady, yet filled with compassion. "Tell me your story. I need to understand." Aisha's eyes flickered with a mixture of disbelief and something else, a hesitation, a quiet vulnerability that Theodora hadn't seen before. For a moment, the walls seemed to crack. Slowly, Aisha spoke. "We were a family once," Aisha began, her voice trembling slightly. "My mother and I, everything seemed perfect. I was just a little girl, and I thought my father was the strongest man alive. He promised us everything, love, security, a future. But he never kept his promises. One day he just walked away. Left us behind without a word. And when I found out about the other woman, the one he'd been with for years, it broke my mother. She couldn't survive it. And neither could I." Theodora's heart ached for Aisha, but there was more to this story, more that needed to be uncovered. Aisha paused, as if the memories were too painful to continue. But then she reached for a small worn notebook from her bag and handed it to Theodora. "My mother's diary," Aisha said, her voice thick with emotion. "She kept it all these years. Maybe you'll understand it better than I ever did." Theodora took the diary, her hands trembling. As she opened it, she felt the weight of a past that had been buried for too long. The pages were filled with heartfelt words, some of them full of hope, others filled with despair. And then she came across an entry that made her blood run cold. "I've just learned the truth. Marcus's wealth isn't just built on business. It's built on blood. And I'm afraid of what he'll do next. Aisha deserves to know the truth, but I can't bring myself to tell her. Not yet. Theodora's breath caught in her throat. What was this secret? What had Marcus been hiding all these years? The diary clutched tightly in her hands. Theodora knew one thing for certain. The truth was far darker than she had ever imagined. The truth is finally beginning to surface, and it's darker than Theodora could have imagined. What exactly is Marcus hiding? Leave your theories in the comments and sit tight, for things are about to get even more intense. Theodora's hands shook as she held the diary, her mind reeling with the weight of the revelation. The words from Aisha's mother, Marcus's wealth isn't just built on business. It's built on blood, replayed over and over in her head. What did it mean? Was it metaphorical, or was there something darker hiding behind Marcus's fortune? She hadn't planned on confronting him yet, but the truth could no longer be ignored. She needed answers, and the weight of the diary in her hands pushed her toward the man who had started this entire journey. The man who had trusted her with his final wish. With a deep breath, Theodora stood and walked to the door. She could feel the storm brewing inside her as much as the one outside. Her mind raced as she left the apartment and made her way to Marcus's estate. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension, the kind that comes before a confrontation, before everything you thought you understood about someone is called into question. Marcus was waiting for her when she arrived. He looked smaller than before, the frailty in his face more pronounced. The weight of the world seemed to have settled into his shoulders. His gaze was distant as he stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker beneath the evening sky. He didn't turn when Theodora entered, but his voice broke the silence. "You found something, haven't you?" His words were barely above a whisper, but they carried the unmistakable tone of guilt. Theodora clenched the diary tighter, stepping closer. "I found a lot," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "And it wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about money. It's about blood, Marcus. What did you do?" Marcus's body stiffened, but he didn't turn around. For a long moment, the silence between them was thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders slumping as if he could no longer carry the burden of the secrets that had haunted him for decades. "I knew you'd find out," he murmured. "I've been waiting for this moment, but I never wanted it to come." Theodora took another step forward, now standing directly behind him. "Tell me the truth, Marcus. What did you do?" He turned to face her then, his eyes hollow with regret. The man who had once been so powerful, so confident, now seemed small, diminished. The walls of his empire, built so carefully over the years, were crumbling around him. "I made a choice," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "A choice I regret every day. Aisha, she wasn't just my daughter. She was my everything. But I let my pride and my greed destroy her, destroy us both." Theodora's heart ached as she watched him struggle to find the words. She had expected anger, maybe even defiance, but there was none of that. Only the raw, open wound of a man who had lost everything. "I never should have left her," he continued, his voice breaking. "I should have fought for her mother. But I didn't. And now, the damage is done. There's nothing I can do to fix it." Theodora felt the weight of his confession press on her chest. She had believed that Marcus was the villain in this story, the man who had abandoned his daughter and built an empire on lies. But now, looking at him, she couldn't reconcile the man in front of her with the cold, calculating billionaire she had imagined. This was a man broken by his own choices, haunted by the past he could never change. Torn between the desire to comfort him and the urge to turn away, Theodora felt a deep sense of empathy for Marcus. But the bitterness of his actions still lingered in her chest. She could see the pain in his eyes, but she also saw the damage he had caused. "You can't just erase the past, Marcus," she said softly, the words a reminder she needed herself as much as they were for him. "You can't just fix everything with a promise, or by asking me to find Aisha." His eyes darkened, his shoulders slumping even further. "I know," he whispered. "I know. But I have to try. Before it's too late. I have no time left." Theodora paused. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Marcus to show her this side of himself. But now, with the truth laid bare, she realized she had a decision to make. She had come here to find answers, but the questions were only multiplying. She needed to confront Aisha, bring her to him. But did Aisha even want to see him? Could she forgive him for the life he had stolen from her? "Please," Marcus said, his voice desperate, pulling her back to the present. "Bring her to me, Theodora. I know it won't be easy, but she needs to hear it from me. The truth. The whole truth. I don't want to die with this guilt anymore." Theodora's mind whirled. She had already come so far, but what was she really doing? Was she helping him? Or was she simply carrying out his last wish for the sake of closure, for the sake of a man who didn't deserve it? She thought of Aisha's words, how she had rejected him, rejected everything about him. Still, there was something about Marcus's plea, something raw and vulnerable, that made her hesitate. She wanted to believe in his sincerity. She wanted to believe that this man, the one who had built everything on power and wealth, could still be capable of change. "All right," she said, her voice steady, but there was an edge to it now. "I'll bring her to you. But you need to be prepared, Marcus. She may not want to hear your apologies. She may not be ready to forgive you." He nodded, his face grim, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, hope. He had nothing left to lose, and yet he clung to that fragile thread. As Theodora turned to leave, Marcus's voice stopped her. "There's something else you don't know. Something you've missed." Theodora paused, her hand resting on the door handle. "What do you mean?" Marcus's eyes locked with hers, his expression unreadable. "Aisha isn't my only daughter. There's someone else, someone you might know." Theodora's breath caught in her throat. "What? Who?" she asked, her heart racing. But Marcus didn't answer. He simply looked away, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Theodora's mind was spinning. Who else could there be? What had Marcus kept hidden all these years? The storm outside seemed to rise once more, a fitting backdrop to the whirlwind of uncertainty Theodora felt. She had come looking for answers, but now, more questions loomed. And she knew deep down that this was only the beginning of what would unravel the truth once and for all. A new twist has just emerged, and the mystery deepens. Who else could be connected to Marcus Stone? Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel to stay abreast of heartfelt stories like this. Now let's continue with the story. Theodora's mind raced as she drove through the quiet streets, her hands gripping the steering wheel with a tension she couldn't shake. Marcus's words echoed in her head like a distant thunderclap, vibrating through her chest. "Aisha isn't my only daughter. There's someone else, someone you might know." Her pulse quickened, the road ahead blurred in her vision. The storm outside had left the air thick with humidity, and her breath felt short as she tried to process the revelation. What could he have meant? Another daughter? Who else could there be? She had been so sure that finding Aisha would be the final piece of the puzzle, the answer to everything. But now, Marcus's cryptic statement twisted everything she thought she knew. Theodora's mind kept going back to the moments she had spent with Aisha. The coldness, the bitterness. But now she couldn't help but wonder, had she been right all along? Was there more to Aisha's anger than just abandonment? She barely noticed the car slowing as she neared the small town where Aisha had been hiding. She knew what she had to do now, but the weight of this new truth pressed heavily on her chest. How could she even begin to wrap her mind around the idea that she, Theodora Soto, just a waitress from a small cafe, was somehow tied to Marcus Stone, a billionaire, in a way she had never imagined? The car finally came to a stop in front of Aisha's house. The building was small and nondescript, tucked away on a quiet street in the middle of the town. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, thick with the tension that had been building for days. Theodora stepped out of the car, feeling the weight of every step she took toward the front door. She rang the bell, her stomach turning as she waited. She had come here with one purpose, to confront Aisha again. To ask her directly about Marcus's other daughter, the one Theodora had no idea existed until moments ago. Aisha opened the door, her eyes narrowing when she saw Theodora standing on the threshold. Her coldness hadn't softened, and there was an unmistakable wariness in her gaze. "What do you want now?" Aisha's voice was sharp, and there was a tension in her posture. She was clearly ready for a fight, but Theodora was no longer afraid. "I need to know the truth, Aisha," Theodora said, her voice firm. "You know something I don't." "Marcus," he said, "there's another daughter. Someone I might know." Aisha stiffened at the mention of Marcus's name. The flicker of something, fear? Regret? passed over her features, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "I don't know what you're talking about," Aisha said, her voice colder now. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, as if warding off the conversation, as if closing herself off from Theodora. Theodora's heart sank. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but this was different. She had never felt so close to the truth, and yet the walls between them seemed higher than ever. "You can't keep lying to me, Aisha," Theodora pressed, taking a step forward. "You've been hiding something. I know you have. Marcus said there was another daughter. And I think I know who it is." Aisha's eyes flickered, but she quickly masked it with a sharp, defensive look. "I don't know anything about another daughter," she said firmly, but there was a tremor in her voice that Theodora couldn't ignore. Theodora's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The way Aisha had shut down every time Marcus's name was mentioned. The way she had reacted to the idea of confronting her father. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper. Something more personal. "Why are you lying to me?" Theodora asked, her voice softening, though the urgency still pulsed beneath her words. "What is it you're hiding? What's the real story?" Aisha's jaw clenched. For a long moment, she didn't speak, her eyes fixed on Theodora with a cold intensity. But then, as if the weight of the secret was finally too much to bear, Aisha took a deep breath and dropped her arms to her sides. "You want the truth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The truth is, you're his daughter, Theodora. Not just me." Theodora's breath caught in her throat. Her mind went blank as Aisha's words crashed over her like a wave. She felt like the ground beneath her had disappeared, leaving her suspended in a state of shock. Her hands gripped the edge of the door for support, her body trembling. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, unable to process the words. "That's not possible. I'm just a waitress. I don't have anything to do with Marcus." Aisha's eyes softened for the first time. She stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "That's the truth, Theodora. You've been searching for me, but all along, you should have been searching for yourself." Theodora felt like the world had tilted on its axis. She was no longer just a bystander in this story, she was in the middle of it. She was connected to Marcus Stone by blood. Her heart raced, and she struggled to breathe as the weight of the revelation suffocated her. How was this possible? She thought, her mind reeling. Why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't he said anything? Aisha continued, her voice quiet but filled with a strange sorrow. "My mother always knew the truth, but she couldn't bring herself to tell me. She didn't want me to know what Marcus had done to both of us. She didn't want me to know how he'd abandoned us, only to build his empire on our backs." Theodora took a shaky step back, the world spinning around her. She was Marcus's daughter. She too had been hidden away, unaware of the connection that tied her to the man who had turned his back on them both. Aisha's face was filled with a kind of pain that Theodora had only seen in those who had been deeply betrayed. Aisha had lost everything, and now Theodora realized, so had she. "You've been living your life with no idea of who you really are," Aisha said, her voice cracking. "But the truth is, Theodora, you're part of this too. You're part of the mess he made. And now, we're both stuck with it." Theodora felt a cold sweat break out on her skin as the weight of Aisha's words settled over her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just someone who had been caught up in Marcus's tangled web. She was his daughter, his other daughter, and she had just uncovered a truth that was almost too much to bear. Her world had been small, predictable, safe. But now, with the truth so brutally exposed, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. What did it mean to be Marcus Stone's daughter? What would her future hold now that she was bound to a legacy she had never asked for? All she knew was that the path ahead was uncertain, and the truth was far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. Theodora has just uncovered a shocking truth about her identity, and things are about to get even more intense as secrets are about to be laid bare. Theodora stood frozen, the weight of Aisha's words still echoing in her ears. The truth, once buried so deeply, had now surfaced in an instant. "You're Marcus Stone's daughter." She felt the world shifting beneath her feet, the very foundation of her life crumbling as the pieces of her identity suddenly shattered. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just Theodora Soto, the girl who had lived a quiet, unremarkable life. She was tied to an empire, a legacy she never wanted, a man she never knew, and a truth that seemed too heavy to carry. Aisha's voice, soft and resigned, broke through her thoughts. "So what will you do now?" Teodora didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. Her mind was still spinning, the truth too raw, too new to process. But she could see the pain in Aisha's eyes, the same pain she felt churning in her own chest. They were both caught in this web of lies, and now, there was no escaping it. Finally, Teodora cleared her throat, fighting the lump that had formed there. "I need to talk to him," she said quietly, the words barely escaping her lips. "I need to hear it from him. I need to understand what happened." Aisha nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'll be waiting for you." With a deep breath, Teodora turned and left. The air outside felt cooler than it had before, the night sky now clear, as though it were waiting for her next move. She didn't know what she would find when she confronted Marcus again. She didn't know what to expect, what he would say or how he would react, but she knew she couldn't walk away from this. Not now. When she arrived at Marcus's mansion, it was eerily quiet. The long driveway seemed endless, as if the house itself was stretching out before her, waiting for her to step inside and uncover more secrets. The grand gates opened slowly as she drove through, the weight of the world pressing on her chest. Marcus's home had always seemed like a place of refuge, a fortress of power and wealth. But now, it felt like a tomb, silent, cold, as if the house itself were holding its breath. She parked the car and walked up the stone path, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the gravel. Inside, Marcus was waiting for her. He looked worse than he had before, pale, gaunt, his movements slow and deliberate. The energy in the room was heavy, the air thick with the reality that time was running out. "Teodora," Marcus said, his voice raspy, almost strained as she stepped into the room. He gave her a faint, tired smile, but there was no joy in it. Just the burden of a man who had lived too long with regret. "I've come to talk to you," she said, her voice shaky. "I've come to hear the truth from you." Marcus nodded, his face darkening, his eyes shadowed with something deeper. "I know what you found, Teodora. You've learned the truth. And now, you need to hear it all. I never wanted you to know, never wanted you to be a part of this mess. But I'm running out of time." Teodora's chest tightened. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but this wasn't it. The weight of his admission, of his guilt, felt suffocating. She could see the fear in his eyes, not just of death, but of facing the truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Marcus sank into a chair by the window, his face weary. "I thought I could protect you from this," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought if I kept you away from it all, if I kept you from the pain, maybe you could live a better life. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Teodora. I should have told you the truth. I should have let you make your own choices, but I was too afraid of losing you, too afraid of facing the consequences of my own actions." Teodora's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She had no time for tears, not now. She had to understand, had to know everything. "Tell me everything," she demanded, her voice stronger now. "Tell me why you left us. Why you abandoned us. Why didn't you fix it?" Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, his face etched with sorrow. "Because I thought it was too late," he said quietly. "I thought I had already lost you both. I couldn't face the truth. I couldn't face the consequences of the man I had become. I built this empire on the backs of lies, on the destruction of my own family. And the one thing I couldn't fix was the damage I did to you, to Aisha, to your mother. I was too weak to fight for you. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Teodora stood there, her heart breaking for the man in front of her. She had imagined him as a villain, someone who had turned his back on the people he loved. But now, she saw the broken man behind the empire, the man who had lost everything, and who knew it was too late to make things right. "Please," Marcus said, his voice pleading, "there's only one thing left for me to do. I need you to bring Aisha to me. I need to face her. I need to apologize to her before it's too late. Before I die." Teodora's heart twisted at the desperation in his voice. She had come here to find answers, but now she had a new mission. She had to get Aisha to see him, to help him face the past that had haunted him for so long. But as she turned to leave, ready to bring Aisha to the mansion and end this chapter of pain, Marcus's voice stopped her. "Teodora," he said, his voice low, almost trembling. There's something you don't know. Something you've missed. She paused, her hand on the door handle, her heart pounding in her chest. What is it, Marcus? He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something else, a fear she couldn't place. Aisha isn't my only daughter, he said, his voice cracking. There's someone else. Someone you might know. Theodora's world tilted on its axis. She turned slowly, her breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Who else? But Marcus didn't answer. He simply looked away, as if the truth was too much for him to face. The silence in the room was deafening. The pieces of her life, her identity, were shifting faster than she could process them. Who else? She thought. Who else could there be? And as she stood there in the silence of the mansion, Theodora knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of the story she had yet to uncover. Everything Theodora thought she knew about herself is about to shatter. Who else could Marcus be hiding? What's the truth behind this new revelation? Theodora's hands trembled as she stood at the gates of Marcus's mansion, the heavy weight of his final request still lingering in her chest. He had given her a task, a mission to reunite him with Aisha, to heal the wounds that had festered for years. But what Marcus had failed to mention, what he had kept hidden behind his walls of guilt and regret, was the darkness that lay within his family. With a deep breath, Theodora glanced at Aisha, who was standing beside her, her expression unreadable. The tension between them was thick, but Theodora could feel the unease in Aisha's posture, as though she, too, was dreading the confrontation that was about to unfold. They had come together, bound by their shared history, but neither of them knew what they were walking into. As they stepped through the grand doors of the mansion, Theodora was struck by the stark contrast between the opulent exterior and the chaos that seemed to consume the inside. The house, once a symbol of Marcus's power, now felt like a war zone. The lights flickered, and the air was thick with hostility. The walls, which had once held the echoes of laughter and love, now reverberated with the ghosts of betrayal and regret. Theodora's heart pounded in her chest as she moved further into the house, her eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway. The sound of muffled voices reached her ears, harsh, heated conversations. And then she saw it. Marcus, lying unconscious on the floor. His body was limp, his breathing shallow. Aisha! Theodora gasped, her voice shaking as she rushed to his side. She dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers trembling as she reached for his wrist. The pulse was weak but steady. He was alive, but barely. Aisha stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. What happened to him? She whispered, stepping back as if the sight of her father's fragility was too much to bear. Theodora didn't answer. She was too focused on Marcus, too consumed with the urgency of the moment. She could feel the tension thickening in the air, the reality of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't just about Marcus's health, it was about something far darker, something deeper. As she tried to assess the damage, the sound of footsteps approaching caught her attention. A man appeared at the end of the hallway, tall and imposing, his eyes cold with a mixture of anger and determination. His face was a mirror image of Marcus, though there was no warmth in his gaze. Theodora looked up, her heart sinking as she recognized him. Marcus! The man shouted, rushing forward. What the hell happened to him? He dropped to his knees beside his father, his hands hovering over Marcus's lifeless form. Theodora stepped back, her eyes narrowing as she watched the man. A part of her instinctively recoiled. There was something off about him, something in the way he moved, the way he spoke. He was angry, but it wasn't just anger. It was something else, something dangerous. Who are you? Aisha's voice cut through the air, her tone cold and demanding. The man looked up, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face her. You must be Aisha, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. It's about time you showed up. Your father's been waiting for you. Aisha didn't flinch, but Theodora could feel the tension building between them. The air was thick with resentment, and it was clear that this wasn't a reunion. This was a battlefield. I'm his son, the man continued, sneering at Aisha. And I've been trying to get through to him for years. But of course, he's too busy wallowing in guilt to listen to me. Too busy trying to fix the mess he made of our family. Theodora's eyes flickered between the two of them. This was it. The moment she had feared had finally arrived. She could see it now, the greed, the anger, the power struggle that had been festering beneath the surface all these years. This wasn't just about Marcus's health, it was about control. It was about Marcus's empire, the legacy he had built, and the people who wanted to take it for themselves. "I don't care about his empire," Aisha said quietly, her voice steady but firm. "I just want to know the truth." The man let out a harsh laugh, a bitter edge to it. "The truth," he spat. "What truth? The truth that he's a failure? The truth that he abandoned us both? The truth that he's been living a lie for years? There's nothing left for him to fix, nothing left for you to get from him. He's a dying man, and he's already lost everything." Theodora watched the exchange, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that this was more than just a family reunion. It was a war for control, for power, for a future that none of them were ready to face. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, followed by the deafening sound of a gunshot. The echo of it rang through the mansion like a gunshot through the silence of her mind. Theodora's body froze. Her eyes darted toward the source of the sound, her breath catching in her throat. She barely registered the chaos that erupted around her, the screams, the shouts, the sound of rushing feet. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart as she rushed toward the source of the noise. She burst into the next room, her eyes widening in horror as she saw Marcus's son standing over him, holding a gun. The weapon trembled in his hands, but there was no mistaking the intent in his eyes. "Stop!" Theodora screamed, her voice hoarse with panic. She rushed forward, but the man's eyes were wild, desperate. He wasn't listening. He was too far gone. "Get out of my way!" he shouted, his voice filled with rage. "I'm taking what's mine. No one's going to stop me." Theodora's pulse raced as she rushed toward him, but before she could reach him, another gunshot rang out, this time from somewhere deeper in the mansion. Someone had fired. A scream cut through the air. Theodora's heart dropped. Who had been shot? Was it Marcus? Was it someone else? The room was spinning now, the chaos overwhelming her senses. She could barely breathe, could barely think as she looked at Aisha, who was standing frozen at the door. The question hung in the air: who had been shot? Theodora stood frozen in the doorway, her mind a swirl of confusion and panic. The gunshot had shattered the already fragile air in the mansion, and the world seemed to pause for a moment. The question of who had been shot clung to her, unanswered and desperate. She turned toward Aisha, who still stood at the threshold of the room, her face pale and wide-eyed, locked in shock. For a heartbeat, Theodora couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind raced. What just happened? Was it Marcus? Was it his son? Was it one of them? The walls of the mansion felt like they were closing in on her, the reality of what she had walked into crashing down like an avalanche. "Who's been shot?" Aisha whispered, her voice barely audible. Theodora's body shook as she tried to steady her breath. I don't know," she stammered, her gaze darting between Aisha and the scene unfolding before her. The chaos in the mansion seemed to swirl around her like a storm, but the silence between her and Aisha felt like the loudest sound in the room. Before they could react further, there was a movement in the other room. Someone, Marcus's son Theodora assumed, was on the ground, clutching his side, blood pooling around him. The realization hit her like a punch. He had been shot. But who had fired? Theodora rushed forward, her instincts kicking in. She knelt beside the man, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the wound. He groaned in pain, his eyes wild with fear and rage. His hand gripped the gun, still clutched in his trembling fingers, though the weapon was now discarded to the side. "We need to help him," Aisha said, her voice strained with uncertainty, stepping toward Theodora. But Theodora hesitated. "No. We need to get out of here. Now," she said, her voice tight with resolve. Aisha didn't argue, though Theodora saw the conflict in her eyes. They both knew what needed to be done, but the gravity of the situation, of everything that had happened in the past hour, pressed down on them. Marcus's son, who had been so eager to claim what was rightfully his, now lay on the floor, vulnerable and broken. But Theodora couldn't let any of them, drag her into their cycle of greed and manipulation any longer. Theodora stood up, her knees weak beneath her, but she could not falter now. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when everything she had learned about herself and her place in Marcus's life came into focus. It wasn't about the fortune, or the legacy. It wasn't about the betrayal or the fight for control. It was about truth. And peace. "Let's go," Theodora said firmly, her voice carrying an urgency that rang true in her chest. She turned toward Aisha, determined. "We have to go. We need to make this right." With Aisha following her closely, Teodora led them both out of the mansion, past the chaos and bloodshed. They needed to leave it all behind. The ride to Marcus's mansion had been a blur of tension and uncertainty, but now, with the gravity of Marcus's request still heavy on her shoulders, Teodora couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right decision. She looked over at Aisha, sitting silently beside her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on them both, the silence between them thick, filled with words neither of them were ready to speak. It was then that she realized just how deeply the past had shaped both of them, how far they had come from the people they had once been. Marcus was gone now. His secrets were his alone to carry to the grave. But Teodora and Aisha, they were still alive. And their futures, as uncertain as they were, lay in their hands. Teodora glanced at Aisha, who had her gaze fixed out the window. "You don't have to do this," Teodora said quietly. "You don't have to follow this path. The money, it's yours, but you don't have to let it define you. Marcus didn't want it to define you." Aisha's eyes flickered to Teodora for a brief moment, her expression unreadable. "I don't want his money," Aisha said, her voice soft but firm. "I never did. I just want the truth. The truth that he never gave me. And now I can make something of it. For myself. For my mother." Teodora could see the shift in Aisha's eyes, the strength that had been buried beneath the anger and hurt. The bitterness, once so thick, was beginning to dissolve into something new. Something that could only grow from here. "Then we'll make it right," Teodora said, "a promise. We'll find a way to move forward." The next few days passed in a blur. Teodora's life, once so predictable and routine, had been irrevocably changed. She had spent every moment since Marcus's death in search of clarity, of answers, but all she could find was an emptiness that seemed to fill every corner of her existence. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was Marcus's daughter, and with that truth came a heavy weight she wasn't prepared for. But Aisha was there too. The two of them had begun to talk, really talk, in a way that Teodora had never imagined. They shared memories, pieces of their past that had been hidden away for so long. And in those moments, Teodora found that the road ahead wasn't just about Marcus's death or the family he had left behind. It was about healing, and choosing a future that didn't revolve around a legacy built on lies. Aisha had decided to use her inheritance, not for herself, but for something greater. Together, they would open a foundation, one that would help women who had been abandoned, left to fend for themselves in a world that had forgotten them. It wasn't the fortune Marcus had left behind that mattered. It was the legacy they would create with it. Teodora walked away from the mansion, away from everything Marcus had built. She didn't need the money. She didn't need the wealth or the title. What she needed, what she had always needed, was the truth. As she stepped out into the world, into the future that awaited her, she knew one thing for certain: she had fulfilled her promise to Marcus. But now, it was time to fulfill a new one. A promise to herself, to Aisha, and to the women they would help along the way. The world was wide open, and for the first time in her life, Teodora felt free. Free to define who she was, not by the name she had inherited, but by the choices she would make moving forward. As she entered her apartment, still processing everything that had happened, Teodora's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it slowly, her heart skipping a beat. The message was simple. A single line. "You've made the right choice, Teodora. I was wrong, but you've changed everything." It was signed, Marcus. Teodora held the phone in her hands, staring at the message as the weight of the past and the future settled on her shoulders. She had done it. She had made the right choice. But as she stared at the screen, the question lingered: what did Marcus mean by this? What had he meant by "you've changed everything"? Teodora's journey has come to an end, but what's next for her? What does Marcus's message really mean for her future? Comment below with your thoughts on Teodora's choices and what lies ahead for her. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt and emotional stories that explore the power of truth, transformation, and the choices that define us.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.